Thanks, Chris. Thank you all for being here. This is really exciting. Josh and I have been talking a lot about how we get the word out about these changes that are going to be impacting the city of San Luis Obispo. And this is one of the groups we wanted to talk to most, because you all touch so many of the projects happening in the city and have the ear of your clients and other professionals. And so it's really, we really are thankful that you had us here today. We will be going pretty quickly through this presentation because we have heard there's a lot of interest in question and answers. So we'll do our best answering all your questions. But this is new for the city as well. So in some cities, the changes to the very high fire zones, they've been dealing with some of this longer than we have in the city of SLO. You'll see some maps here. And so we are also learning as we're going, and it's also really helpful to hear the sticking points that you're all hearing from your clients or as you're working through projects, because that helps us improve our processes and systems. And I'll just say, one of the things Josh and I are most concerned about is how do we address these new changes from the state, the new requirements, in a way that impacts the development process as little as possible. So getting what we need from architects and designers and your clients, but without bringing the system to a halt. So we're really trying to figure out how do we make this as seamless as possible. Yeah, so just briefly, a lot of you were involved in the code process, but in March of 2025, the State Fire Marshal released some updated fire maps. We'll show you what those look like. It's a very big change for the city of San Luis Obispo. We went from a few parcels in the very high zone to thousands of parcels. The timeline shows we're now in January 2026, so the new WUI code, which is new to us from the state as well, is in effect currently. And we'll go through Chapter 4, Chapter 5, and Chapter 6 that address all of the requirements. Staff went to the City Council and basically said we should adopt the WUI code as is. Let's not go beyond what the WUI is recommending, because it's already a fairly big change for the city of San Luis Obispo. So that's generally what the City Council adopted, with a few outdated definitions and other clarifications in our building code that were made.
Yeah, so as Director Tway just mentioned, it itself is its own part. It's Part 7 of the Building Standards Code. They basically took Chapter 7A, which was at or around 11 pages-ish, right? And then Chapter 49 of the Fire Code, which was at or around 5 pages. And miraculously, we came up with an 82-page document. So I'm fairly good at math. I don't know how that worked, but that's what happened, right? And so that's what we ended up with the fire code. The city has no choice other than to adopt this, unless you're like San Francisco and LA and you write your own codes. We go with the California code, and that's what we were given. All right, as we move forward, I want to explain the why. And look, take a look at this video if it's hard to see. This is firefighter Doolin. This is actually at the Palisades fire. They've posted up at a house that was home hardened and defensible space. When this camera turns around, I want you to pay particular attention to the embers and the wind. Look at the embers that are flying down this alleyway. Because of the efforts by this homeowner, starting from the design portion of it all the way to the implementation and then the maintenance of this home, they were able to save 7 homes because they made this an anchor point. Our guys, our team, got punched out the day after the fire started. They were able to make an anchor point and save 7 homes on that block. All because home hardening standards and defensible space was implemented into this one resident. So you'll see in there he's firefighting tactics. He's putting himself in front of that flame. I'm going to tell you right now, he's eating a lot of heat, okay? And he's doing that because he's passionate about saving this community. Those embers are going back behind him. And they're taking measures to cool the structure. You saw him doing water conservation in his nozzle technique. He's keeping the flames back. He's not going to put it out, but he's keeping the structure safe and keeping the embers at a minimum from going past him. As Director Tway mentioned, we went from, in 2009, 68 parcels in the very high fire hazard zone. Of those 68 parcels, we had what you could call 34 of them had structures. So 68 parcels is how it's measured, to a grand total of 2,845 parcels now in the very high fire hazard severity zone. It was actually the LA Times classified the county of San Luis Obispo, and more importantly the city of San Luis Obispo, as the top 3 cities that was the most impacted by the fire maps.
And as we go through this, I think it's important for us to all remember kind of the semantics of what we're talking about. So there's hazard, which is the built conditions that have the potential to initiate or exacerbate wildfire. probability, vulnerability, and consequence. And so it's just important as we talk about this with clients, with people, my staff, with people at the counter, we are always very clear with people, the difference between risk, hazard, vulnerability, because this is a very emotional topic for people. So I think it's important for us to remember the importance of the words we use and where this information is coming from the state with these maps. I think people look at it and go, oh my God, I live in a very high fire zone. And so to help explain to them what that means, risk versus hazard, is really important. And we're more than happy to talk with you about how to talk with people about that if it's a concern. And this is information that we probably kind of all know, but California burns. This is not new. We're actually doing some proactive planning around it right now, which is good. I mean, this is the silver lining, this has happened for a long time. Today, almost 13% of Californians live in a WUI zone, and obviously it's serious. We saw what happened with Palisades and Eaton fires, and these are the things that we can do while we're building projects to help protect the community that we live in. And so briefly, we'll go through some definitions so we're all on the same page. Yeah, so what the city has done is the first challenging point that was given to us is we have to define what is the city of San Luis Obispo's WUI zone. And going through a very lengthy process with legal and many, many meetings, we've landed on that all three, moderate, high, and very high, within the city is called the Slow Cities WUI area. So if you hear us refer to our WUI area, that's that has been displayed here in the purple. Okay. The other thing that we should pay particular attention to is the fire hazard severity zone. So that's back to the moderate, the high, and the very high. It's also very interesting to point out that the state of California has never created a moderate zone in what's called the LRA, Local Response Zone. They've never done. They've always done moderate in the state responsibility. So when we got these maps, we were like, whoa, where's this moderate zone coming from? They've never done that in the past, and the expansion of it. The very high fire hazard zone, commonly referred to here in short abbreviation, VH, very high, that's the red. That's where probably a lot of your questions are going to come from. The fuel modification zone, when you see a number 0, 1, 2, that's referencing the distance from a structure outwardly. So that's the fuel modification zones, and these are the fire hazard severity zones. If I was making the names, I probably wouldn't have made zone duplicated, right? I would have spread that out a little bit, but it can be confusing. And from a practicality standpoint, for all of us, we will be asking, we train staff at the front counter, what city are you in? What zone are you in? What's your address? This is going to be the next question. What fire zone are you in? And so I would just say, as you're looking at projects, as you have clients, that should be the second thing, third thing that you ask, because that will impact what the city's asking of you and things like that for your plan reviews. So I think this needs to just become similar to looking at the zone, the height limit. It should be what fire zone are you in? Are you in a flood zone? Things like that. This is the breakdown of the California WUI Code, 2025 WUI Code. So Chapter 3 is it defines how the maps are made, who are going to make them, and the frequency at which those maps are going to be made. And that's every 5 years. So just pause there for a second. If my job is to make the maps, what do you think my job's going to be in 5 years? Make more maps. Probably make an expansion, right? I'm going to make they're not going to be the same, and I'm not drawing down. We can only guess the maps that he or she are going to be making are going to expand, right? So let's just make that a harsh reality of what's happening. The city has no say in that, even though we've already petitioned as agencies in this county to why did the maps land the way they are? We want some information, and basically the state came back and said the maps are the way they are. You cannot restrict them. You can only expand them. Chapter 4 is your fire access and water supply standards. That's going to be the fire hazard severity zone. So remember the purple map. So everything in Chapter 4 is going. If your development is in the purple zone, it would be applicable to Chapter 4. Now, Chapter 5 is your ignition-resistant building materials. The home hardening is commonly referred to as.
That's citywide. It doesn't matter what zone you're in, that's citywide. That was because of a designator from 2012 where we were considered a community at risk. And at that time, there was a lot of home hardening elements were brought in to the city's standard, short of windows, gutters, downspouts, and I think that was pretty much it at that time. So we were already really, really close to completely having a home hardening full aspect. Now moving forward, it's the whole thing. All structures within the city are going to meet Chapter 5 requirements. Chapter 6 is the defensible space. That's where you're going to talk about the area around the structure and outward, vegetation management, fire protection plans, and landscapes. That is only applicable if your project is in the very high fire hazard severity. That's the red. Chapter 6 is applicable to your project if it's in the red zone.
And this is where, just in talking with people, we're seeing the most confusion, the most concern. I mean, this is about people's yards and their gardens and trees. And so this is where we're seeing a lot of concern from the community and a lot of focus we're putting into this section in particular. Because Chapter 5, the home hardening, that's been in place for the most part for a decade or more in the community, and so it's not so much of a change. So you want to cover this one, and
Sure.
then I'll jump in?
Yeah, so back to Chapter 4, as we said, there's the purple map. So not a lot really was changed in the fire access and water supply. Again, it was taken from the fire code and implemented into the WUI code. I think the biggest change, that if I can remember off the top of my head, is cul-de-sacs extended by 5 feet. The minimum right now is 80 feet. So that's not a, I mean, to me, that's not a big hit, but I understand. So if we're doing a road development in that particular area of the purple, the cul-de-sacs are going to have to be extended. We will not be able to shrink that down.
And this will mostly be addressed through the Community Development Department through the Engineering Division. And again, this is larger scale projects. So you're doing a subdivision, you have to do public improvements, and we've already updated our engineering standards to address a lot of the requirements of the WUI code. So if you have questions about this, it's specifically Community Development Engineering, but again, it's generally for larger projects where you're building new infrastructure. So Chapter 5, this is the special building construction regulations, or the building hardening or home hardening. It applies to all new buildings citywide and remodels and additions to buildings, but only the project area. So that's a question we've gotten. I have an older house, I'm putting a 1-bedroom on the back of the house. Do I need to bring the whole home up to kind of building hardening standards? No, just the addition area. But new ADUs, new homes, new commercial buildings need to comply with Chapter 5. Again, as Josh was stating, we've already done a lot of this in the community up until now, and so the biggest changes are windows, downspouts, gutters, and it only impacts projects with a building permit. And it, again, does not apply retroactively. We're not going to go out to your house, you live, in the city, and say you need to do some home hardening. It's just if you come in for a building permit, the area of the project. We'll check it through plan check. We're already doing, staff is well aware of this. We'll talk to people at the front counter, and then we will also check it through inspections on the back end for projects. And there are some poster boards about home hardening, but it's about building materials, roof materials, enclosed eaves, underfloor enclosures, doors and windows. Just one tip, things we've started seeing coming in, decks as well. So a lot of people don't think about decks, but deck rebuildings, new decks, a lot of those will get caught up in this. So just watch for materials, and if you have questions, the fire department has made some really amazing handouts, and we're always available at the counter to talk through this. This is the fun stuff, Chapter 6.
Chapter 6, yeah. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. We did make a lot of handouts. I brought a copy of each one of those, and just for display purpose if you want more. And every single one of them are in a digital version on slowcity.org/wildfire, a brand new web page that didn't exist a month ago, that this young lady right here, Mika, who's filming, built and locked herself away and went at it, and we were feeding her a lot of information. And so there's more information on slowcity.org/wildfire, and all those digital information flyers are there. This is I get that this is not necessarily a good representation of what our lots look like, but it is an excellent representation of Zone 0, Zone 1, Zone 2, and the way they have spaced it out. And this is kind of the image that would say, hey, this is what we should be thinking about when we're talking about landscape planning and moving forward with projects that are in the very high fire hazard severity zone. So again, Chapter 6 is applicable to all of the red within the city. And the biggest, I think, the thing that we're going to see on your part, or what we're requesting in the plan review or the submittal, is going to be the landscape plans. So the way that works is for larger subdivisions, larger developments, we will be requesting a fire protection plan. You can find that in section 602. For some of the smaller ones, the single house, the ADUs, you're going to be required to submitting a landscape plan. And that landscape plan is going to be reviewed by my staff. And then thank you for Government Code 50182 and Public Resource Code 1299.03 states that I now have to sign off on your project before you can get occupancy for your project. So it forces me to inspect. It only says in the code, only required by the fire marshal or fire authority. And we're saying, well, that would be terrible if I have to go out and sign off on the building card. Your vegetation plan, landscape plan, does not fit within the requirements of the very high, and I'm making you move plants that are already in the ground when you're just wanting that final signature. So we're making it a requirement early on, catching it early on, making those changes on paper, so that when my staff shows up, it shouldn't be but 30 minutes to an hour, walk it, does it match the plans, sign your permit, move on.
And this is one of those areas, let me start with the fire protection plan. So fire protection plan, large scale, so new subdivisions, new large project, new large commercial projects. And this isn't necessarily new information. We've asked for this, it just hasn't been in one kind of document. And this actually, I think, will be incredibly helpful. One example is the legally binding statements regarding community responsibility. We have a lot of new HOAs in the community, and now, if someone complains about hazardous vegetation in 3 years, this document will define in this community who is responsible for making sure that the vegetation is cleaned up in this area. And it will clearly define, is it the property owner, is it the HOA, is it the city? So this will be helpful for kind of all of us moving forward in these larger subdivisions to know who is responsible for what when it comes to fire safety, making sure access and egress is clear, things like that. In terms of the landscape plans or vegetation plans that Josh was talking about, this is likely the biggest change just in terms of projects coming into our office. So so first thing to check, is this project in the very high fire zone? And if there is landscaping involved, we're going to need to see, or a new building, because you might not be touching the landscaping, but you might be putting an ADU in the backyard, and now you have some issues with how close are plants to that new building, even existing plants. So your landscape plan might say, we're not touching anything, but here's where existing plants are, here's what they are, and here's where the ADU is. And so then Josh's team needs to make sure, okay, is there the required zone 0 setbacks, how's zone 1 looking, and further. And these are things we are actively working through, trying to figure out how do we get all the information we need and make it as easy as possible for applicants to comply. We don't want very fancy professional landscape plans if someone's just doing an ADU in the back and there's existing plants, right? We'll work with you. We want this to be reasonable, but we absolutely do not want it to get to a point where you're ready for occupancy and the fire department comes out and there was a tree we didn't know about next to the building and it becomes an issue. And so this is a large change, and it will impact projects moving forward. So.
And to trailer on what you're saying, Director Tway, some AHJs have landed differently on how do you define if our project is in that zone. And so what we've done is we've gone by parcel. So first off, it's not the structure. Some AHJs say, well, if the structure is in and even a sliver of the red fire hazard severity zone, we go by the parcel map. Even if a sliver of it is red, the whole parcel is red. is how we're treating it. So that is the defining line moving forward. So I get a lot of calls on that. Like, hey, you know, the structure isn't, but the parcel is. Sorry, that's where legal and everybody's landed on this. It's going to be the parcel. So we have created some guides for Community Development Department with basics of what your vegetation and landscape plan needs to include. We really want to see like what plants are you planting. Distances are really important. We're going to come out with as many graphics as we can. We're going to do outreach to miners and Home Depot and places. So if, you know, people come in and go, I want to redo my garden, but I'm in the very high zone, like there's common language, there's a common understanding. Our dream is that Josh has a sticker with his face on it and his thumb up, and then they put a sticker on each plant barrel, and it was approved by Slow City Fire, yes. You know? If only Home Depot would sign off on that. Well, one day. But we are doing as much as we can to touch base with everyone from landscapers to you all to permit expediters. The other thing, and the other thing I wanted to note, Chapter 6 is different than Chapter 5 in that it can be retroactive. So again, when we talked about Chapter 5 with building hardening, we are not ever going to go out to someone's property and say, you need to harden this building, because if they're not doing any work there, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. However, with defensible space in the very high zone, a neighbor could call, and we are going to do reactionary enforcement, but a neighbor could call and say, hey, someone has, you know, a situation on their property, they are not complying with the defensible space requirements, and they will need, regardless of whether that person's doing a new project or not, they will need to comply with defensible space requirements. What Director Tway is talking about is new draft language, current draft language. We probably have all heard the term Zone 0. That is kind of a short term, like home hardening for defensible space. So Zone 0 is the 0 to 5 feet. That legislation is currently in the hands of Board of Forestry in a draft version, and they were supposed to have had it, according to Gavin Newsom's executive order in 2518, was supposed to have had it done by December 31st of last year. They did not do that. You got to imagine the robust lift this is. They get over 2,000 comments on just this legislation alone per week, and they've been dealing with those comments in multiple workshops. If you go to Board of Forestry, go to their search bar, type in Zone 0, it'll pull up their last meeting, which I believe is on December 8th. You can get a draft version of what they're talking about with the Zone 0. And in that language, it is a 3-year grace period for existing structures. And in other words, if you own a property, and you'll have 3 years to comply, but after that 3 years, a neighbor could call and complain about your vegetation is overgrown and create a problem. I am now forced, according to Government Code 51182, that I now have to go and notice and notify that property owner that they're out of compliance. Okay, and as going as far as administrative citation and even to as far as abatement type procedures. So when it comes to vegetation, the state has taken a very hard stance on we're not messing around, and they're forced our hand on that. Again, Zone 0 is draft language. I expect to see the actual adoption of that at or around March to April, and that's whenever that adoption happens, a formal adoption process, that will start the 3-year grace period clock. The other thing I wanted to mention is, in the city of San Luis Obispo, we don't require a landscape plan just to change your landscaping. So if you came to the counter, you said, hey, I'm not doing a building project, but I'm going to tear out my front yard and replant my sod into something else. We don't require a landscape plan or approval, but if you are talking to people, if they are in the very high zone, even if they don't need approval from us, because of that, they should be thinking ahead and trying to comply with these requirements. And so that's the kind of weird gray area we're in right now, is that, again, once that grace period is over, even if someone did something that didn't need a building permit. Another example is, and I don't know, are wood fences still in the Zone 0? Yeah, so anything combustible within that first 0 to 5 feet.
So we have
gates, fences.
A lot of wood gates that touch the house and then hit the fence. And so if someone is looking to replace that gate right now and they live in the very high zone, I would highly recommend that they use a non-combustible material Because again, once that's adopted in 3 years, then that is something the city can retroactively come back and say, you need to address that. And what we don't want is for people to make investments in their property now, think it's fine, and then it's not in 3 years, if that makes sense. So I would highly recommend looking at the draft Zone 0 legislation just to see what's in there. And we will be pushing all of this information out as much as we can once it's there. This, we'll provide the slide deck to everyone, but you can go back and look at this. This is what Josh was talking about with the various zones. We're also trying to spread the information to people. Like, this doesn't mean it's going to be a concrete jungle. You know, I think there's a lot of misconceptions when people hear this, that it means no plants, I gotta cut down all my trees, like it's going to look horrible. That's not the case. And so one of the other things we want to do ultimately would be to have some demonstration gardens, to work with some people in the community that wanted to use their yards to show what it could look like and how you could do this, but make it look really great, and use those as examples. And so, you know, I would love to hear if you have ideas or thoughts.
Yeah, if you have a property in mind that you know meets full home hardening and is defensible space, please hit me up, give me a business card. We want to be rolling out some examples and workshop videos.
You want to jump in?
Oh, my turn. Okay. Yes. Maintenance of defensible space. What 6 really comes down to, and Director Tway mentioned it with the covenants, is it really comes down to a maintenance. Okay. So even when you look at what the definition of fire smart vegetation is, the 8 characteristics the state has defined, I believe it's 3 of those are a maintenance in nature. It's not, has nothing to do with what the plant does. It just means maintaining the dead, keeping the dead out. The rest of those are true characteristics of the plant. Like a plant, we don't want plants with high resin, right? We want to keep low resin. We want something that holds a lot of water. Those are called fire smart vegetation. So when it comes to fire protection requirements, it really comes down to the maintenance portion of that. And I can't stress that enough when it comes to, okay, what happens is what you develop the project, you build this beautiful, gorgeous, whatever you're building, and then I, as the fire department, it lives with me forever, right? So no matter what happens or how many hands changes hands, it always is going to fall back on me. So whether there's an event there or not, or you just have that individual who lives on the cul-de-sac who wants to complain about everybody, and we get it, right? And we're predicting, and I certainly am not advocating, that if, let's say I'm that neighbor and I complain about your house, and then the fire department shows up and you're like, wait, what do you mean I'm out of compliance? And this is a complaint? Well, I want to complain about him and him and him and him and him. And I just go from one house to 12, right? I mean, that's the harsh reality of what we live in, right? And so we're trying to avoid that as much as possible. I'm not the plant police. That's not what I get paid to do. It's not what I signed up to do. I'm not in the tree removal business either. But at the end of the day, I am in the business of keeping our community safe. Yeah, so this is a great example. Have anybody seen this on YouTube with the Palisade fire? What are some harsh realities that jump out to you as architects about this structure? I can't hear. What's that?
There's no eaves on that left-hand side.
Right, definitely. Huge, right? Does that make it less or more pretty? Less, right? 100%. Let's call it for what it is, right? This is not the aesthetics that us as California, I'm from San Diego, withstood all of that fire that it could throw at it, and it's still standing to this day. There's a whole YouTube link on this. This is 100% hardened to every degree you can imagine.
And so as we move through it, we're almost done, I promise, ready for questions. But there's a few other things we've heard from the community. Do you want to talk a little bit about these two? I'll jump into the tree order.
Yeah, risk mitigation and insurance. So the other component that we have to mention briefly is there's the insurance component of this. And at the end of the day, the government code actually allows them to come in and say, if an insurance carrier says that you're out of compliance, they can drop your insurance. They can force you to do more above and beyond, that type of thing. I also want to mention that the last half of that small paragraph states, in conjunction with me. So I have to be in agreement. They can't just arbitrarily do that. However, at the end of the day, we live in a particular society where, they can, as a private business owner, drop whoever they want for whatever reason they want. And we want to avoid that. And in fact, I have fielded dozens of calls of individuals stressing or crying over this nasty letter that they got about their insurance being dropped. We can't avoid the discussion from start to finish of a project that are we potentially designing a project that is later, that is in the very high fire hazard severity zone, that property will never be able to be insured and therefore never be able to be purchased or bought or sold. That's a discussion item that we have to think about, right? So real estate insurance companies pay a lot of money to lobbyists, so my personal opinion on this, my professional opinion is I don't think the goalpost is moved on this. It's not done being moved. I think that they're pushing even more stricter. I mean, it looked at $28 billion in the Palisade and Easton. That's direct property loss. That's not counting the other loss of when you factor in people out of employment and things like that. Direct property loss, $28 billion. Just those two fires. So if I'm an insurance company holder, I'm the boss. What am I going to do? I'm going to reduce my risk and what I'm covering, right? Real estate disclosures. We don't perform AB 38 inspections for the city. We don't have an ordinance requiring us to do so. So when we do adopt, if we do adopt an ordinance, then we will be performing AB 38. That's a natural disclosure form inspection for properties that are sold. And it's just a disclosure form. It's just saying that either your home is or isn't meeting the requirements for defensible space. And then the two parties, the seller and the buyer, it is the seller's agent responsibility to get that form, to sit down and bargain whether they still want to pursue the purchase of the home, whether it's in compliance or not.
And then the tree ordinance, which is very divisive. Some people think it goes too far. Some people doesn't think it goes far enough. But one of the things we did when we saw this new legislation was start to look at that very closely. I want to make sure that there's nothing in our tree ordinance that is going to act as a barrier to someone who is trying to comply and do what, Josh's team might come out and say, hey, you need to do X, Y, Z to comply. And I don't want them to get stuck. And then my team says, well, now you need to pay for a permit and you might get that permit denied. I mean, that makes no sense, right? So, but it's complicated and it's a very emotional topic. And so I would say to all of you, if this is something you're interested in or you've had challenges with, please keep your eye out for when this will go to Planning Commission, Tree Committee, and ultimately Council. Right now, our tree ordinance in particular, it protects almost every tree on private property in the city, which is a lot. And it's one person doing the reviews for it. And so we're looking at how can we write it in such a way that takes into consideration new Zone 0 legislation, properties in the very high zone. Maybe there needs to be a difference in how we address those different things. So we are working on that. Just to close out, we're doing a ton of engagement. If you have other groups that you'd like us to come talk to or places we can come or information we can share, please let us know. And with that, we are ready for questions and really appreciate your attention and your time. And I'll leave our contact information up here. I think you know how to find us, but just in case you don't. So I don't know how you want to field, if you want us to just call on people. I'm happy to do that.
I think can everybody hear each other if we were to talk just out loud at our pages? I think if you can field questions directly to the crowd.
Yep, and I can reiterate them if people can't hear. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you right now, Freddie Ott, who's our biologist, Walter, who's our arborist, and what Director Tway is talking about, I have a seat at the table of this tree ordinance stuff. I absolutely have been invited into the discussion of it, right? So it's a balancing act of community safety, but also at the same time, we're not trying to have everything demolished, right? And so, and I appreciate the fact that I've been a seat at the table to discuss that. It is a challenging topic, and our discussions, I will tell you, are quite positive, and we are definitely engaged with everything, right? So like, for example, the hospital they have all these large trees that house monarch butterflies for a particular season, and they're looking at wanting to trim that. So we organized a meeting with both the emergency manager, myself, Freddie, and Walter, and we walked the property and came up with, I think, a pretty good 3-year rollout plan. So those discussions happen on a regular basis.
And
That's a good question.
yeah, I'll say from a higher level, when I was in Beverly Hills, we were dealing with a very high fire zone up in the hills, and one of the things we did was amend the tree ordinance in that city, which also has pretty strict regulations, to add additional allowances. Like if the fire department requested a tree and the property owner approved, was okay with it, you weren't required to get a certain type of permit that you previously were. We also had a list of species that, in working with our city arborists and the fire department, it was like, if you have one of these species and you're in the hillside area, you do not need to get a tree removal, but you have to replace it with one of these. You know, so there are ways cities can address that proactively, but on a case-by-case basis. I mean, Josh's team is absolutely involved in that. I do, just frankly, the tree issue is going to be a long issue that we're going to deal with, and it's going to be pretty emotional, and people are very invested in that issue. And so I anticipate it's going to be some tough conversations about balancing the desire and need to protect the trees in the community with also the desire and need to address safety in the very high zone.
One of the things that makes me successful in my job is the interconnection between departments. Okay, so one of the things that we've rolled out, and I mean, you've all been working with city government for a number of years, right? I was able to get 7 different departments and sub-departments to come together in agreement on a newsletter that we're going to be pushing out quarterly. And so it is huge for me to say, what is my partner doing on the outside over in the county? What is my partner doing in Atascadero? What is my partner doing in Paso Robles? What can we do that makes sense? And I'll give you an example. One of the first things that came on my radar when I first got here was and I probably will get the numbers wrong, was decking. Okay, so like Paso Robles has a different size decking. We have a different size decking. Why? Why can't we all have the same suppliers so Hayward Lumber can stock 1-dimensional lumber and not 6, right? I mean, that's just astronomical to me why we are even doing this. Like, why is his 2 3/4 and mine 3 1/8? That doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense to me. So if we're under the umbrella of protecting our community and being WUI compliant, we probably should fix some of those things. So those are the discussions that I have. I have a fire investigations component that I meet with on a regular basis, and I have fire prevention. We meet on a regular basis as a county as well.
Yeah, and same for the directors meet pretty frequently from all of the cities in the county, and some of them are not affected at all by this. Some have been affected. Atascadero's dealt with very high fire zone for a long time, so there's a lot that we can also learn from people who, this is new to us. It feels very new. There's cities, you know, again, Atascadero, where they're like, yeah, we know, you know. And so I'm talking a lot to people who have been there, you know, especially with the tree regulations. That's one thing we're doing, is reaching out to city arborists and planners and other jurisdictions, because there is that need for that balance. So
other partnering agencies that I've personally talked to is Boulder, Colorado. Our city's demographic, the makeup, the structure, the geographical area is closely related to Boulder, Colorado. So I immediately reached out to my counterparts there and have had multiple meetings to discuss, how did you come across this defensible space discussion, and what are you doing now? And they're a couple of years ahead of us in that process, and I've gleaned a lot of pitfalls of, hey, don't do this, avoid that, do this, right? And so that's been one partnering agency. I've also reached out to Napa and Ventura. Ventura's had a defensible space ordinance since like 1936. So it's been around for a long, long time, and they're extremely restrictive on what they do, and their enforcement arm is very, very heavy. If you're not within compliance with a certain date, there's a whole field crew management that comes in. They post a sign in front of your yard, we will be there at this time if it's not done, and then they make entry through warrant onto your property and they will abate it. That's how serious Ventura is about it. Very aggressive. I'm not advocating that. Let's just make that really, really clear. Okay, so I see some eyes went like this big, and I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing.
So yes, and we raised this to City Council, the city's general plan has a policy that says there shall be no subdivision in the very high zone. And that makes a lot of sense when you look at what it used to look like, right? It was open space, I think it was partially at, like, let's not develop in these really outlying open space areas, and there's safety component, right? Now it's a different world, and you have parts of downtown, frankly, that are in the very high zone. And so, I don't see him here, but Froome Ranch, has a specific plan for a senior living facility and memory care that was approved and is now in the very high zone. And so right now, if you came in and had a large subdivision and you showed it to us and it was in the very high zone, I would say that is not consistent with the general plan. Having said that, we've raised this as an issue to the City Council. We're going to have, it will either be a kind of a forced conversation through a development project. So like Froome Ranch, for example, wants to move forward, they need to subdivide. And so that question may be answered as part of that application, is should we change that language? Otherwise, staff will bring forward, a study session, say, hey, City Council, would you like us to pursue changing the general plan? Because to Josh's point, this is not going to get pulled back. So we will be at a point in the future where more and more and we cannot have a situation where you cannot subdivide in half of the city, right? And so it doesn't say you can't develop. So I just want that to be clear. Like if you have projects in the very high zone, you can do the same development now, you cannot subdivide. In terms of SB 9, there is a carve out that you can do an SB 9 subdivision, the very high, but it has to meet kind of some high threshold of standards to meet all of the requirements of the code. So if you have an SB 9 project you're interested in the very high, bring it to us, we'll take a look. You still could do that. In terms of ADUs,
it could be an access issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of ADUs, that's super interesting. One of the first things we did was reach out to the state and try to understand like what's the interplay here. And HCD was pretty clear that you shall not consider these zones in any way for tampering down on ADU development. So they were like, no. And so, we are still treating ADUs the same across the city. I think it will become, depending on how this plays out and what we see in the community, there are some communities that have, as they're looking at their ADU ordinances, started to look at risk zones as well, hazard zones. So, but right now it's ADUs the same. Again, sorry, a lot of my experience in Beverly Hills, but you had really hilly areas with like one road in and one road out, and people wanted to do ADUs in this area, and it got very difficult just because of evacuation in a very high zone, that in areas that absolutely burn multiple times in recorded history. So that's where we started really looking at how does ADU play into that. There's a question over here. Yeah.
Yeah, actually I have two questions, not related, but first, will there be a list of fire-resistant plants that are also drought-tolerant?
Yeah.
Does that exist? I don't know.
Yeah, we heard loud and clear at a lot of the council meetings, like lists, please give us lists of not these plants, yes, these plants, here's things to look for. So it's something we're starting to put together, is lists of, and again, it's not in the code, it's not in the municipal code. So if you came to the counter, there's nothing that we can say that says, you cannot do this thing, it's in the code. But we really want to provide guidance to people and give them that information. So we are working on that, lists and drought tolerant / fire safe. You can speak more to that.
It's really challenging. Right now, the way that we're going to interpret plants is going to say, does it meet all 8 characteristics of fire smart vegetation? And if it does, then we will greenlight it and go. In the meantime, it gets problematic. If we start to create an inclusion list and then the supplier can't have those on hand, then we are creating a problem further on down the line, right? So we want to try and avoid that. But it seems to be the feedback we're getting is maybe an exclusion list. Like, let's stay away from these plants that we know for sure are high risk. That seems to be simple. We could start there, and as long as your vegetation meets fire smart vegetation characteristics, we should be okay. And in the meantime, as we walk through this in the 3 years that we have the grace period of all this stuff, I think we can land somewhere on some pretty good checklists.
Yeah.
Sorry, second
Yes,
question.
go ahead.
And then my second question is different. What about small lot developments where you don't have 5-foot setbacks in some cases? Like my own neighborhood, we're 6 feet from our neighbor, 3 feet and 3 feet. And they've got junk on their property that we can't control. How do you deal with that now moving forward?
In the vegetation component of defensible space?
All of it,
Yes.
yeah, defensible.
100%. So I'll just tell you what the code says. Zone 0 code says 0 to 5 feet, no ignition, no ignitable materials, right? Flammable materials, right? And so, I mean, they're getting in the Board of Forestry down to like how many pots of plants you can have. And I mean, they're really getting into the weeds of it, right? Pun intended. And so, yeah, to go straight to the point, the way it says is that if you have a fence that's separating those two, that would need to be a non-combustible fence, because if you have a 3-foot setback on here and a 3-foot setback here, you're within that one structure, it needs to be non-combustible. So back in March when the maps were released, March 10th actually, because it was one of those dates where my mind went, right? I mean, it was that detailed. Seeing the domino effect of this. Todd Tuggle, fire chief, Todd Tuggle and myself immediately coordinated with other fire chiefs in our county, and under the umbrella of SLO County Fire, they are also under the umbrella of CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE is the one who makes the maps. We coordinated a letter of objection. Hey, can we at least have some say in this? Because there's some things in there that just doesn't make sense. Like, why is this red, but this other area over here is moderate, when this really should be red, and this over here should probably be nothing, right? And why would you do that without us at the table? We know our area better than anybody else. We have enough people here in knowledge and institutional knowledge to be able to say, hey, this map makes sense, or no, this map doesn't make sense, right? And the letter we got in a very political, nice way was, yeah, sorry, there's no way to object this. That's just.
Do we know the basis on which they're drawing those maps?
That's
Are they using AI.
I'll tell you what they. That's a loaded question, but I'll tell you what I got. That's proprietary information. I've talked to past map makers, and I was able to get like some information of how they used to do it, like say 20 years ago. But that's all. That's obsolete. They're obviously using probably some plots, GIS. Satellite imagery, things like that, right? And they're pulling in things like wind patterns, fire history of that particular area, and then they did this Embercast model, and that's where the map blew up. When they did an Embercast model on if winds were coming this direction, at this rate of speed, at this heat and this temperature, what would that Embercast look like? And that's what blew up the red. Also a new factor that was never factored into the maps in 2009.
I don't think so. I think we really are trying to be reasonable. We're just looking for like, what is the plant here? Where is it generally located? You know, stating if it's existing or proposed. We're just showing dimensions and distances. So I would just include every plant, because you have, I mean, especially in the 0 to 5. And so as that gets fleshed out more, and as we can kind of indicate to people, here's what we need to know in the 0 to 5. Here's what we need to know in the 5 to 30. And then.
The code actually requires that I look 100 feet outside that property. I'm not doing that. You're building an ADU on a, 2,000 square foot lot, you know what I mean? Like, and a little tiny box type thing. I mean, 100 feet is going to be how many properties, right? And that's unrealistic. That's not going to happen. And so we're looking at, even as we were just talking about this, the simplifying that down to Google imagery. We're looking at, hey, tell us what this is. We do need to know distances and give us as close as you can to what these plants are. What we don't want is a surprise. Hey, there's this giant eucalyptus tree that was there that you didn't report, and it's up against the building. Now we have a problem, right? The code wants us to go outside 100 feet, right? So past the property line. We're thinking something reasonable like 30 feet at most on the outside of the property.
And really what I would say, Josh might get mad at me for saying this, but in the interest of being reasonable, I mean, obviously you can control what's on your property, right? And you can list the plants and things.
Yeah.
One of the things we had talked about is just saying, hey, as part of your landscape plan, why don't you give us a Google aerial image of the surrounding, and then just mark if one of them is a large tree and like what that species is. You know, just very basic information.
Yeah.
So again, we're not surprised that there's a giant eucalyptus 1 foot on the other side of the fence, something like that, where we could have taken that into, you know, that is important for some reason. So that's really what we'll be looking for in terms of what's on other properties, is just throw in a Google aerial image and mark if something is, you know, a larger thing and what the species is, if you know. So
You have just hit the bullseye of my mind went crazy sideways in March, right? How do you enforce somebody else's property over what somebody else's structure, right? And so, good thing the California code did land on this, and I'll give you this example to answer that question. If you're building an ADU and I live next to you and my property has a giant mulberry tree that my grandparents planted and I'm not going to remove and I'm not going to touch it because it's like, you know, an idol to me, and you want to put that ADU within 5 feet of that tree, I do not have the authority to force that person with that tree to remove or change it. And you are not restricted. Oh, you can still put that ADU in. But it comes in this balancing act of what's best for the community and how we can get through there. My approach, and we've had long discussions about that, soft and always education. So it would be knock, knock, knock. Hey, just so you're aware, this is what's going on. We have resources. So it's not that we need to come in and heavy-handed with a hammer. I need to be able to come in and say, we have a volunteer coordinator, Kristen Anderson, and she has an army of people. We just purchased and received 2 chippers, and we have open space technicians and rangers, and we have chipper days. So why can't I just come in and say, hey, just so you know, we would prefer to provide this service to you and help you out, whether you're on a low income, whether you're a fixed income, or you're physically not able to do that. But if you can get some young person with a much more healthier back than mine, and can pull those limbs out, we'll chip them and haul them away. That is a much easier solution and a much easier approach that I think that we're, for this community to become compliant and fire resistant. Because I have to look at the big picture, right?
yeah, but to your point, property line is like this magic line. Luckily, because I also went there and my brain exploded and I thought, I have to quit because I can't, you know, how are we going to comply with state housing law and minimum setbacks for ADUs, and then someone has a big tree 1 foot away? I mean, it just is going to be a nightmare. But, you know, we've landed on that property line. You cannot control what they do. We're not going to tell someone, hey, someone has the right to put an ADU 4 feet from their line, but you have a eucalyptus tree 1 foot away from that. But to Josh's point, like, that doesn't mean it's still not a problem. And one thing I want to be clear about is we are not interested in removing trees. We are not interested in forcing people to. And I think we all need to remember, like, maintenance of trees can go really far for this. A lot of it is maintenance. And so Walter Galt, the city arborist, has already gone out and talked with people who are like, I need to remove this tree, and just worked with them and said, wait, if you just limb the tree up here or remove this branch, like, look, it's already much safer. You know, so we would always, always, always prefer people start with, let's maintain that landscaping over time, and let's continue to maintain it. And then, like, the last resort is removing the tree, unless, of course, it's failing or it's sick or whatever. So.